All right, it seems we're on. A warm welcome to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here right in the heart of Brussels next to the institutions, and welcome to you. Wonderful. So we are the two of us here to ask us anything, as long as it concerns EPSO exams. So I'm sure we can talk about our favorite Belgian beers and other interesting and wonderful subjects, but that's probably not the reason for being here. So with that, let's do a very quick sound check, and I think that we will have to that well. Perhaps we can come up with some solution for that. But we'll wait a second or two just to be sure that the technology works. Okay, I'm hearing that the audio is a bit distorted. I'm wondering what we could do about that. Yes, let me try to switch over to a different channel with the audio. And hopefully that. Okay, let me just get a confirmation. Is the audio any better? Okay, audio seems to be better. Oh, wonderful. Good. It's a little complicated with the audio. Now I see what the issue might be. All right, technology is always a wild card. Hang on, let me try. I'll just wait a second. I'll wait a second to hear how is the audio now. Is it any better? Now it's good. All right, wonderful. We sorted out. We sorted out. I think resiliency used to be a skill.
One of the EPSO competencies.
One of the competencies. So yes. we are testing our own resiliency here, and it seems to be okay. If there is any concern, I have this backup solution, so we will manage. So with that, let's actually have you enter your question into the chat box, and we will pick and choose every one that we can tackle. And we will probably prioritize questions that are of broader concern. So not necessarily very individual cases, which again, we're happy to answer those perhaps via email or following up in some form. But we want to be sure that questions that are really affecting many candidates would be prioritized. So, okay, I think we can already get started, and I see already two questions coming in, and maybe I'll just take the first one, and then Luc and I will see how we tackle those. So the first one is about what will the written test exercise be like? Well, just to give a bit of context to that question and to the answer, and then Luc will hear what you have to say about it. So the written test in its maiden name case study. And I say maiden name because it's recently been rebaptized to be called written test. So basically, the written test is very similar to the case study with some differences. One is that it's going to be in EU 24 languages, because the new system or the system that has been recently updated requires the exams to be run in 24 languages. So that's one exception or one change. The other change is that there are different types of written tests being talked about, and it depends on each competition which of these are going to be used as an exam. And by different types, I mean that there could be a written test. All the written tests are based on some background material, and that is typically material coming from EU sources, because it has to be available in 24 languages. So at this point, it doesn't seem likely or practical to custom create content and then translate it into 24 languages. The more likely scenario is that the selection board will pick and choose different source materials that already exist in 24 languages, compile that into a document, and it may as well be just one analysis, one document, or multiple different sources. And that's going to be a background document, which they will communicate, they will release to the candidates 5, 10 days or 2 weeks before the exam. Based on that, you get an assignment. And that assignment is the written assignment. Now, the different written test types, which again may differ from one competition to another, will tell you whether it's purely testing your communication skills, or it might also be testing your field-related knowledge. That's for specialist competitions. So that needs to be seen, but as things stand right now, it's a 40, perhaps 45-minute written exercise, obviously on a computer because it's remotely done. And what the assignment is, again, there is a bit of unknown there, but broadly related to that background material, and it could be to write a briefing on a specific angle or a specific aspect, or it might be to answer 1 or 2 questions related to that background material. So I mentioned there are different written test types. There's one which is purely the communication skill focus. The other one could be communication skill and field-related knowledge. And the third one could be on EU, not even EU knowledge, but framed about an EU policy. But that is being talked about in the context of the 85 generalist competition, which, as most of you would know, has not been launched, is pending, but likely happen towards the end of this year. So that's in a nutshell. Luc, anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add.
All right, next one. This is for you. Does EPSO request a language certificate as an application accompanying document?
It only requests this when the competition notice mentions it. At the time, but this is quite long ago, we asked for it when it was in particular for competitions that were for interpreters, for linguists, for translators, etc. But until now, this is not longer asked for. It's quite normal for simple reason that the competitions, the test itself, are a language test. It's in 2 languages. So if a candidate does not have the required level, it's unlikely that she will succeed the test in a particular language that she claims to have a command of.
So basically no formal certificates of that kind, but practically you do need to have a good command of that language.
Indeed.
Does the upcoming AST3 competition focus solely on the finance sector? So that, for those of you who may not be aware, so there's an AST3 competition that is due to be launched, I think the 25th of July, but double check that on the forward planning page. And as far as I recall, there are 3 domains, and all 3 are broadly related to the finance sector, so different aspects of it. So the answer is yes. And one interesting thing about it is that there has not been an AST3 competition for a long time, or to be accurate, there was a competition, but it was canceled or, well, suspended, and this seems to be the relaunch of that competition. But having said that, there has not been a proper brand new AST3 competition for quite some time. Okay, next one. Will they publish what we need to know about the MCQ in the field? Look, do you have any information on that? So the domain-specific knowledge, I presume, for specialist competitions.
I don't have any information for that. That this will be communicated to candidates, but I would strongly suggest, as it is related to your domain and to the EU, that you study the different aspects, first of all, of your domain, and then framed into the EU policy with regards to that particular subject of the competition.
Just to back up that suggestion and to emphasize how important that is, indeed, it's always this dual approach where you look at what your specific domain actually, what's the body of knowledge related to your domain, which of course can be huge depending on the domain, but always looking at the overlap and the aspect of the EU concern, right? Indeed. Looking at the DG's website, annual reports tend to be good sources of information. There are a multitude of aspects and information sources there. Good, next one. This one we answered. And Are there no guarantees to be hired once you get into the reservist? I mean, inside the budget they have as a number, is possible to be hired for sure. That's over to you, Luc.
Yeah, well, there is no, it is even laid down in the competition notice, there is no reason to, there's no certainty, to be recruited once that you're on reserve list. Of course, you can lobby with the EU institutions to put your application forward that you're a successful candidate. And in particular, when you contact the different DGs or institutions, that a good advice from my side, from our side, is that you write your motivation letter and CV, you adapt it a bit to the subject and the domain, the policy dealt with by the service or DG where you are interested in. But indeed, do not stay passive until the institutions will call you for an interview. Be proactive and assertive.
To add to that, I think one interesting aspect, and that's partly in the question, do the institutions have an actual plan to hire a certain number of people based on the number on the reserve list that they put? And broadly speaking, yes, but again, they need to factor in life. So some candidates may not be available at the time of recruitment, or others may be not willing to take up a certain job, and maybe their life circumstances will change by then. So those numbers need to be factored in. And that's why Luc's advice. So you need to be proactive and looking for vacancies, applying for those, presenting your application in a form that's going to persuade the future employer or the future boss that you're going to have, that you are the one that they want to pick. And by the way, we have a webinar on that. So how to get a job once you are on the reserve list, and that might come in handy. Next one, what information regarding selection for the AD transport? I'm not sure the question is specific enough. So the transport competition is ongoing, as far as I know, and exams are likely happening after the summer, probably. And again, this is just a guess, and that's a big caveat, sometime late September or sometime in October, but it all depends on EPSO's own internal planning and their agreement with the new remote testing provider, which is probably a topic on its own that we're going to address soon enough. Next one, how you prepared crisis management question, how you decided what key topics must be included. I think that's a question to us as EU training, and we had subject matter experts who work in the field and are knowledgeable about the field, and they said, okay, this domain is high on the agenda. We would again look at what's the body of knowledge in that field and what is topical at the same time. And topical, not necessarily of what made the headline in Politico yesterday, but something which is high on the agenda related to the field. So those were kind of the principles that we applied, and then certainly that translated into specific domain questions.
Can I add something to this?
Please.
Also related to the competition notice. You have in the competition notice, you have the duties, you have for some competitions, not for all of them, I think also for this one, that you have the areas and activities to which your professional experience should be related. All this may count into what could the specific questions be.
Okay, next one. Are there any news regarding the EU IPO or IPO, or I never know how to pronounce that. So the EU Agency for Intellectual Property Office in Alicante, in the field of intellectual property? We don't have news, or at least I certainly don't. And perhaps I crowdsourced the question. If anyone has that in the chat, feel free to put that if you're comfortable sharing that information. We're waiting. The latest I heard from some contacts over there is that it's on hold, and there are ongoing conversations between EPSO and the agency, so the EU IPO agency, as to how they sort out the exams, because there were technical problems back then. Exam was suspended, and they need to sort out and figure out how they do it, whether they do an on-site exam, which doesn't seem too likely given the legal repercussions of that. So it needs to be seen. I don't have any direct information on that. Right. This is for you, Luc. How can we increase our chances of being invited to a CAST permanent exam, assuming we have correctly filled out the call for interest form?
Well, based on your interest and your domain of expertise, you can then contact the different agencies and institutions, because normally the cast permanent, all EU bodies can recruit from this. And I would strongly advise to contact the services and DGs that could offer posts related to your interest and your domain of expertise. So this way you can be pre-selected by one of them. This is the way you can, let's say, speed up the invitation for your test.
Here a question to you. So how do you actually find out which departments, which units, which DGs have such openings?
Some of the posts that are published on there is unfortunately no website that centralizes all contract staff positions, temporary agent positions, etc. You have to see if there would something be on the EPSO website or on the different websites of the institutions and bodies. I know it's a huge task, but it's the only way to come across, provided they publish it, because very often they don't publish these positions.
Yeah.
So it's even hard to know.
Internally, there are such lists, right? But those are internal, like intracom, and they're not allowed to disclose it to.
I'm not sure even this is on intracom. I'm not even sure.
Maybe not even there.
Yeah,
right.
Not even there.
So, and occasionally I do come across on various mailing lists, on even social media occasionally, where somebody would post to say, well, we have an FG3 position, apply, and then it feeds you into the cast selection process if you are shortlisted, right? But again, it's somewhat ad hoc. Unfortunately, I wish we could say something more reasonable. Though we at EU Training do quite a lot of scanning, like the one that you mentioned, Luc, but we don't necessarily come across the function group 1, 2, 3, 4, so the cast related positions. It's rather the temporary agent and similar posts that the agencies or other institutions
There is no obligation to publish it publicly. It's only an obligation to publish competitions.
Yeah. Next one. So 80 Eurostat. These are a syllabus for the MCQ tests. The points related to duties is really large, like statistical analysis, etc. No. So where we are right now, and perhaps I should have started with this big caveat of where we are with the EPSO exams. Many of you would be well aware, others may not, but just to be sure we're on the same page. So today, June 2024, things are still moving. They are not moving as unexpectedly or unpredictably as they did a couple months ago, but there are still a lot of moving parts in the system, just like the one I mentioned about the written test, similarly to things like a syllabus for a specialist competition. Right now, there's no syllabus for the specialist competitions, at least not from EPSO. We do try to provide you useful links and resources as EU Training, but again, with the big disclaimer that these are just pointers and by no means the official compendium or syllabus. For the 85 generalist, what had been communicated many months ago is that there will be such syllabus. So there will be some booklet or pointing you to various websites which will refer to what you are expected to know for the 85 generalist EU knowledge part. But for the specialist exams, there's no such a thing. So for statistics, transport, all the others, we do try to be helpful, and we have those freely available pieces on our website. Again, with the caveat that this is our very best educated guess, but not the official point. And just to finish off this idea of where EPSO is, we are still observing, and I'm suspecting they themselves are somewhat figuring out certain finer details, but it seems to be that the system is consolidating to some degree, and exams are going to be and are being relaunched, like we see with the statistics competition. That's a brand new one. It's not a relaunch, so that's already a positive signal. Okay, is it possible to pass a specific competition like macroeconomics and then apply for jobs inside the EU institutions, not necessarily related with the field of the competition? So once you're on a reserve list, are you eligible to apply to any fonctionnaire position?
Well, let's say that normally, and in particular in the beginning of the reserve list, you will not be allowed, I think the institutions will not allow that if you have been successful, for example, in a competition for economics, that you will be working in a position as an HR specialist. This is unlikely, as it has been organized to fill positions within the domain of economics. It could well be after some time that the institutions agree to recruit candidates from a reserve list, laureates from a reserve list, that do not necessarily, that let's say the domain of the competition does not match with the content of the post offered. But what they sometimes do, that they frame the drafting of the vacancy in such a way that it will still match. So it is not impossible, but the best thing to do is, of course, to lobby within the domain of the competition.
We could perhaps say that they're let's say legally it's possible, but it's not necessarily what happens in practice, right? Like there could be exceptions. Let's say if somebody really wants you in a certain position, they can make it happen because legally they are not breaching any rules. But practically, and also, look, maybe that's interesting for everyone on the in this webcast. Is there a kind of a gentleman's agreement between DGs or the different institutions of who can pick candidates from a list?
Well, there is. Normally, for most of the competitions, if not all competitions, in particular for specialized profiles, there are, prior to the publication, and it's subject to negotiations within the institutions and DGs, there are quota. Let's say if we have, all in all, we have 200 successful candidates on a list. This is the target that we want. Then there are quotas in the list. It is subdivided. And sometimes it is published per institution, not the subdivision, but the institutions or the DGs having an interest in the list, a stake in the list. Sometimes it isn't. So it is not always clear for you as a candidate and a laureate which DGs or institutions will have priority with regards to a certain reserve list. When I was an EU official, I have tried on many occasions to systematically publish a list of those having a quota in the list, at least in the beginning of the existence of a reserve list. There is absolute quite an embargo on those not having a quota in the list on recruiting from a list until at least 6 months or 1 year. It can be prolonged each time if 6 months, let's say that the list is blocked for certain DGs institutions.
So just to back up that summary, by quota, the system doesn't mean national quota, right? Like it's a quota for a DG, quota for an institution.
It's a figure.
But it's basically, I'm looking for, there's a word, kind of ring-fenced, maybe that's not the right word. But the idea, you get the idea where a certain number is kind of set aside to say this particular institution can peruse that number of candidates from the list. And when a certain time passes and they still haven't used it, the system gets more flexible. Okay, so is experience in public, European, etc. affairs required in the 85 selection process once you're on the reserve list? The short answer, again, with the disclaimer that we need to see the notice of competition if and when it comes out, I rather think it's when rather than if at this point, is no. So almost certainly, and again, we need to see what the rules are going to say. But experience in public administration, European affairs for the 85 generalist is almost certainly not going to be required, because you could be a physicist or you could be a geologist and you could be a food safety expert, and you would be just as interesting as a profile to the institution as someone who did political science.
If I may add to this, Andras, yes, but an 85 de facto is, I can't recall any competition for an 85 where professional experience was required. In general, it's the university degree and that's it.
Right, and that's another important point indeed, where typically for 85 generalists, they want to cast the net as wide as possible, meaning they really want to get all interested candidates. also leading to the point that Luc just said, no work experience is going to be required, assuming they stick to those rules. Okay, how is relevance of experience measured for 85, 86 competition? So apart from self-declaration, proof of employer, that's a perfect question for you, Luc. So how is, well, maybe there are two parts to this question. One is, how is the professional experience measured, the time duration, and how do you prove it? Because on some occasions, some candidates may not have payment slips and stuff like that.
So this question is very tailor-made for myself, as I was a former advisor to the EU, to the EPSO selection board. So I have myself, I was in meetings where these criteria were drafted on which candidates will be selected. So first of all, the basis is the competition notice. This is legally binding. So as a board, it's important for you to know if there are 6 points, for example, 6 bullet points for areas or activities or duties, the board cannot simply add a duty or an area or an activity. They have to stick to it. What they can, they can elaborate on it, and they can give a certain interpretation to it, but they have to remain close and as close as possible to the competition notices. So no adventures there. So when you draft your application, what does the board do? The board, first of all, takes notice of course, the content of the competition notice, and then looks at your application qualifications and professional experience. And on the basis of this, they compare your professional experience to what is required in the competition notice. And this is then in or out. There are specific rules, they are laid down. I would strongly advise you, when you apply for a competition, to read also the general rules. You know, they are quite revealing on how the board will select candidates, on which basis, duration. For example, you have to mention the dates in your application from to, and do not say March 2012 to June 2013. No, with specific dates, do this, because otherwise the board,
for the calculation, right,
will count as from the end of March until the next year, the beginning of June, and not from the 15th of March, is if this your experience applies to this. So this is the way, in a nutshell, it goes, but it's really subject to close monitoring, close examination, because it's a serious business. Because it's important.
What about the proof, right? Like how does someone provide documentation if they don't have any? What happens then?
Well, if they don't have any, this is quite problematic, because as a candidate, it is also laid down again in the general rules with regards to your qualifications and professional experience. Everything what you claim in your application, you have to be able to corroborate it with evidence. And evidence means not a self-written declaration and signed upon honor, I have been doing this and that. This will not be taken into account. So it should be contracts, job descriptions, meetings where your name is mentioned, etc. So all kinds of documents that can possibly prove, that are not produced by yourself, but by your employer, invoices if you have been self-employed, registered with a professional association, etc. So all possible documents that you can collect.
What would be the case, just for me to verbalize something which I'm assuming would be on the minds of a few candidates? What if they truly don't have anything? Maybe the former employer could write maybe an official letterhead of the organization and say, this and this person has worked for me in this time period. Or you mentioned self-declaration would not be considered.
It has to be come from a former or current employer. That there has to be a kind of a job description with the responsibilities, the duration, etc. Mm-hmm. Right? It is of utmost importance. First of all, the selection board is not supposed to accept it, will not accept it. And there is a second, if I can call it, check that is done, mm-hmm. even confirmed by a court ruling, court in Luxembourg, that if you are offered a post, you have again to submit all documentation, all evidence to the recruiting institution, and they will check again from A to Z. And they will see if what you submit corresponds to your application. And indeed, if it's we ask for 5 years of professional experience, that indeed you have, for example, the 5 years of professional experience related to the domain of the competition. If you don't, the institution will not recruit you.
I remember you and I had an exchange of emails a couple of days ago about a candidate's question, which was on whether employers, or let's say even former employers, can they call up, sorry, the other way around, can EPSO or a selection board, can they call up former employers? And I remember your answer, but I'd like you to
Yeah, but I'm happy
that.
to say, no, this is not done, this we don't do, and to my knowledge, it never happened. We never have. We always go through the candidate, as of course, there are privacy rules, and even with the consent, I don't have any knowledge, and I've been like that for many years, that ever we contact the employer. We contact the candidate, and it's up to the candidate to come up with the documents that we are asking for, but we will definitely not contact the employer to see whether a candidate can get hold of a certain document, if he really worked there, etc. This is not our job, and there are also, of course, the GDPR rules that they come from us, and we have to. The
selection board is not an investigative authority. Even administratively speaking. Here's a question I just caught from the corner of my eye. Can you confirm that a letter from your former employer with contact details is not valid? So a letter from the former employer with contact details, that wouldn't qualify as proof of employment, or?
It depends what is in that letter or in that document. If the company confirms that Mr. A or Mrs. B has worked from till in executing several tasks, as this is an employee. What cannot be accepted is in French we say a lettre de recommandation. How do you say in English?
The which lettre de recommandation, recommendation letter.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, there's not, because this can be seen. I strongly this is advised always to candidates. This can be seen as trying to influence the board. By no means I would do this.
Right. Yeah. So we're talking about formal, proper, pro forma created documents. And here's one question in that regard about what if your former employers are not anymore in the company? Well, the company, presumably, if the company is still around, then they can provide information or a certification or a declaration that meets the criteria we just discussed.
Indeed.
Right. Okay, for 86, does experience need to be in the public sector? I'm assuming this relates to the statistics competition. And look, I think you looked at that, and because there was a bit of ambiguity that certain parts of the work experience need to have been completed or done in a public research institute. Is that the term?
You're dealing with, let's say, public authorities dealing with statistics, or a public research institute dealing with statistics.
Right. Research institute.
Yes.
So how do you interpret that?
Well, my reading is of it that you can read it both ways, because I read the paragraph, I don't know, maybe 5 times I read the paragraph. And reading the paragraph, I'm of the opinion that the experience that you have should be related to the working methodology or to the domains dealt with within the mentioned institutions, but it can also be gathered in the private sector. This is my reading.
Right.
Otherwise, it would, let's say, the number of maybe candidates, and I know from experience that we do not like to be too more restrictive on the pool of attracting the pool of candidates, obliging them to have worked in official institutions.
Yeah,
it would be, they can do it, of course, but it is my reading that all candidates are welcome, provided they have a certain type of professional experience.
I agree with that. Sorry to interrupt. So just to say that I agree with that, based on an understanding that if you work maybe as an external contractor, or even a supplier of sorts, but with that sort of research institute that is described in the notice, that should qualify. So they don't say explicitly that you need to have been in-house or permanent employee or full-time employee or whatever the term might be. Okay, research department in a private company, is that okay? Again, presumably yes, but here we are standing in our non-official yet best effort capacity. Presumably yes, give it a try, and you need to see what the selection board officially decides on that. Next one. What if what if the company went out of business, for example, during the pandemic? Again, I think it's still to the question of experience. I'm guessing there needs to be still some formal document. If not, I mean, assuming that was a properly declared business and job at some employment authority or tax authority or any other, right? Look, so this is where I would probably go towards.
Yeah, it means if for the pandemic, for example, if a company decided to make you redundant or unemployed, this, of course, is then the end of the professional experience. But if you would be still under contract and you receive in one way some allowance, but you have still a contract with the company, I would say then this counts as professional experience.
Yeah, so I think it's finding the right documentation in some official organization or authority that truly has those records, even if the company is no longer around. Okay, are you planning to organize a written test webinar in the near future? Yes, absolutely. So there's one webinar coming up that I'll be running with Thomas Williams, our coach and trainer, on clear writing. So that's the written communication skills. It's framed obviously in the context of the written test, but it's not for one or another specific written test. It's about improving your written communication skills. So we talk about structuring and word choice and all the nuts and bolts that are related to that. So there's one workshop coming up in that regard. One is fully booked. The second one, I think it's on the 17th of July. Just double check on the website, you will see, but Jofi and Balázs, they can probably help put that into the chat box. So there are still places there. We are probably doing a rerun of what we used to call case study, but now written test dedicated webinar, very much focused on how that particular exam is happening. We want to be cautious and we want to be sure that we know enough information, accurate, final information about the format and all the rest before we want to give you advice. But quite likely this will happen sometime in September. Okay. Here's a very large question, which allow me to skip for now, but we'll try to come back to that. Next one, when the reserve list is declared, published, will EPSO be transparent and declare the cutoff marks for field MCQs, if that is the criteria? Let me just address it up front. When the reserve list is published, there's no more cutoff marks or any other, because once it's published, it's published. That means everyone is no longer a candidate, but you are a laureate, that you are on the reserve list, and that legally and practically means you are recruitable. You are eligible for recruitment by one of the institutions, depending on the notice of competition, what that institution is. When it comes to these cutoff marks, that is part of the competition still. And that, again, is the notice, in the notice of competition, to say you need to have achieved or reached 50%, or you need to have been among the top ranked candidates for a particular test, which is typically the field-related multiple choice quiz for specialist exams. And for the generalist, we expect that to be the case for the EU knowledge exam.
If I can add something to this, Andras, normally it should be in the letter that is announcing the results, what is the cutoff. So as Andras said, this, let's say the pass mark you see in the competition notice, this is in the minimum required, but it could also be that it is higher. The cutoff means that more candidates were successful or get a higher mark, and if only 30 candidates go through to the next round, and you are number 31, even when you obtain the pass mark, it will not be enough. So you will be informed of, in that case, what is the real cutoff in the letter announcing the results.
Yeah, it's just to say again, distinguishing between the exam phase or competition phase and the post-competition phase, meaning that we could call a recruitment phase. Here's another one about calculators and the test interface. So for the CBT, the computer-based test, which is not a very accurate expression to be frank about it, because all the tests are now computer-based. So, but typically we would refer to the CBT as the abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning tests. And the question relates to the lack of paper, and no scientific calculator, with brackets at least, are almost impossible. And are there any solutions, alternative tests in an official center? No, because everybody has to be given a level playing field. So everyone needs to be confronted with the same test interface, the same kind of user experience inside the remotely proctored tests. And if there is no brackets or parentheses for, I think that's the British or American, never mind. But anyways, to do functions or to do a bit more advanced calculations, honestly, I don't remember what exactly the calculator looks like these days, because again, that has changed quite a bit since EPSO moved from Prometric to TestWe, which seems to be the new provider. And their interface is slightly different from what the Prometric interface used to look like. And I vaguely recall seeing something that the calculator on the TestWe is a bit more sophisticated. So there are more operations possible, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I'm not, don't take my word for that, because I honestly don't know exactly which features or functions that calculator has. And then again, it might change, because there was a CAST exam, 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot of feedback. There were also technical problems, perhaps not as prevalent as before, but still, and a lot of feedback that candidates gave to TestWe and through them to EPSO, or through EPSO to the testing company. And that might be factored in for future exams. So maybe they will rethink what features and functions they give. So whatever there is now, or what has just been, may not be a straight line to what there's going to be the case as of September. But the point is, you cannot go to a physical test center anymore, and there's no different experience than from those who have the others, your peers, the other candidates who sit the exam. One thing you could do, though, and it doesn't relate to the test interface or the test itself, is more on your side as to finding methods, arithmetics and mathematics, and brushing up your math systems and knowledge to find ways to solve a problem in a different way, presumably with simpler operations, or perhaps more operations, but in more steps, and not doing arithmetic shortcuts. But then again, it's more in the methodology rather than the form. Next one, how much detail should, okay, back to supporting documents seems to be the topic du jour. So how much detail should the supporting document give on work description? It's relatively easy to get contracts and payslips, but not at all to get the proof of the full task description. I think it's a very important question, because specialist competitions are very keen on having relevant work experience, not just any work experience. So Luc.
I think for the document, it is important that the keywords are there. The keyword, you do not have pages, but the more that you have, the better it is, of course. But if keywords are there, that you have been working in this and that, if this corresponds to your application and to the criteria as laid down in the competition notice, it will do. You don't need pages and pages, but at least it should be convincing that what you claim in your application is reality.
Right. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, an example, somebody might apply for a statistics competition, but in their previous job description, it's written that you've done, I don't know, data analysis, which may not be exactly the keyword, which is in that particular profile, but I guess it's the substance, the meaning of the term that's primary.
And normally the board is not obliged, but normally when the board is not satisfied with your, let's say, the content of your documents, normally, no obligation, the board will get back to you to ask for more information. Because once you are on the reserve list, it's not the purpose that we lose you on the reserve list, as we judge that you have been a very valid candidate to take up a position within the EU institution. So we give you all chances, the board gives you all chances to rectify your situation so that you can be put on the reserve list based on your evidence.
Next one, as an advice, the board values more a written test in English among the 24. I'm grateful for that question because I think this has appeared over time in different shapes and forms, but right now when there are 24 languages, I think this is going to be a recurring question. Yep. What is your view, Luc? Well, is it, let's say, so candidates are certainly thinking, I can fill out the application form in any of the 24 languages. Fine, no doubt there. You can choose Greek, Bulgarian, Portuguese, what have you. Question is, does it impact not necessarily their exam scores, but perhaps their recruitment possibilities if they pass certain tests in English, French, German, or one of the large languages?
Well, you mentioned your the knowledge of your languages in your competition, in your application, not only the 2 or 3 languages that are required, depending on the competition, but also the other knowledge. Then you can mention the languages, the knowledge of your language in your motivation and strengths and in your curriculum vitae. And should you be a successful candidate, of course, then you contact the institutions. Well, you can contact them in any of the 24. But it is, of course, better to contact them in one of the main languages for the sake of legibility of your motivation letter and your CV. But with regards to the competition, it makes no difference. I think we are very keen on treating those who write in Polish the same way that those who write their competition in English.
I don't think it, from practical intents and purposes, it matters even for the recruitment part of which languages you choose for the test, right? Like having said what you just described. No. Where it does come into play, it's more about your exam taking strategy. How comfortable are you taking in information in one language or another? How comfortable are you to draft or write a written test in a certain language? And that ultimately comes down to your comfortability with a given language in kind of passive information processing and then actively expressing yourself in a given language in writing, which is certainly very different from the spoken part. But given the nature of the competition, the written communication skills will be what matter for you. Is TestWeek going to stay as a test provider for the foreseeable future, or is it an interim solution? Let me take my crystal ball and tell you the prediction. I can only give you my impressions and my hunch, not even rumors that I've heard. I think they're going to stay. That's my gut feeling, because there aren't that many companies that comply with the technical and data protection and accessibility and all those other requirements. Again, they are not necessarily the best, whatever that means, but given the technical problems that they keep witnessing, but it seems to be they're probably going to stay. But again, I don't know, Luc, if you've heard anything else.
No, I think they will continue, at least because it's quite a complex operation to change now from Prometric to TestWeek. It's a big operation, and I think they're not keen on changing again within a few months. It would again slow down at least the processes of the ongoing competition. So this can't be the purpose. So I share your view that at least for the time to come, if they can, they will continue with TestWeek.
Right. Next one, do you advise to attach a CV, short one-pager, as another supporting professional experience document besides payslips or contracts or other? I don't think that makes any difference.
No, it doesn't make any difference, because, by the way, there is, if I'm not mistaken, in the competition, in the EPSO account, you can attach a CV anyway. So you are required to do so. Once that you are a successful candidate, you are required to attach your CV.
So that you basically do what is required of you in the forms and in the different interfaces, but adding something when the question is about professional experience or similar, it doesn't seem to make any difference.
They will not take it into account because it's self-written in such a case, and we do not want declarations that are signed upon honor at that stage of the competition.
What about more tailored workshop on written tests for 86 economic fields, for instance, and/or statistics? Yeah, that's probably more of an internal question to the degree of what services we offer. And as I said, we're going to have a written test webinar focused on the written test as such, aside from the writing skills. But I think your question relates very specifically for economics field. For that, I would recommend our case study simulation service. So for that one, we already are offering simulations based on a realistic background document, and then we provide evaluation for you, which is personalized to give you a feedback as to how well you responded to a given thing. Now, we are also planning, but again, it's still in planning phase because we need to know the exact final form of the exam background document. But we are planning to offer this kind of feedback evaluation service once the background document comes out. So you can create a simulation, provide some sort of written piece that we are going to provide you feedback on based on the actual publicly disclosed or publicly communicated background document. But we are still working out how that's going to be organized internally and that we can provide a good quality service. Next one, confirmation on the supporting professional experience documents. You recommend not to have any kind of recommendation letter, right? Only certifications with no assessment, right? Because again, that doesn't necessarily provide the formal information. We're talking about the facts, right? The facts, exactly, of ticking the right boxes and not necessarily saying that this person is super nice and is a wonderful companion. Is the Europass format mandatory? I find it not always appealing for recruiters with over 20 years of experience. My CV tends to be quite lengthy. What's the recommended length for a CV? Let me just spend 30 seconds ranting about the Europass, which is always a target of frustration for many people, myself included. But if that's the requirement for certain positions or any formal documentation, unfortunately, that's what you need to play with. But for the rest of the question, Luc, over to you.
They don't like it a lot within the institutions themselves, the EU's, the European, the Europass CV. And I think there are a few other models, if I'm not mistaken, linked to the application, to your EPSO account. I think it's not compulsory, if I'm not mistaken.
And in terms of the length, what is the ideal length of a CV? Generally, the shorter the better, but shorter doesn't mean you leave out important information.
Exactly.
It's just you're more focused and you're more targeted.
Exactly.
Right?
Have 1, 2 page, to maximum. Of course, if you're 40, you will have more to write than if you're 30. So, sorry.
We're moving out of the,
the
picture slowly, right?
Yeah.
Drifting out of vision.
Yeah.
Good. Will field tests for economics competition be at the same time of the CBT? Yes, the answer is yes. So what you're asking is if the field-related multiple choice quiz is going to be at the same time as the abstract verbal numerical reasoning. Let me be very pedantic here, not at the same time, 30 minutes later. But certainly the question here is it going to be the same day in the same sitting, essentially? And the answer is yes. So they are going to follow one another in close sequence at a limited time frame that you booked for your competition on a given day. Next, would you recommend before the competition to take the cast to get familiar with the format of the computer-based tests? You could. Generally, the advice we give is the more you try, the better you get. Meaning, if you test yourself, if you expose yourself to the competitions of whether it's cast, whether it's a permanent position, whether internal competition, if you already have a position inside the institutions, that's going to help you. You practice. It's a bit like practicing a language. At every possible occasion you speak, it's going to improve your performance. So you could, it definitely, it's not a must, but if you have the possibility and the the determination, then you can do that. Right, we have 5 more minutes, so let's take a couple more. Will the interviews from the reserve list also be remote, or do we have to visit the working place outside? And I lost the question, but outside the EU. Largely depends on the head of unit or director who is going to conduct the interview, right? So I don't think there's any general rule for that. Typically, they will, as a general approach, they try to be pretty conscientious with costs, meaning they're not going to fly you to Brussels or Luxembourg if you are based in Athens, or even just not even that far, but even relatively close. Chances are you will have the interview online, and by this day and age, this has really become completely accepted and mainstream. So I don't think anyone would have a true issue with that. But again, it largely depends on the specific unit or organization. I probably, again, this is very much my personal preference, my personal experience. If you can meet someone in person, try to meet them in person. It's just a different dynamic than having a screen between you. Whereas if you are nearby or in the same city, then you can still just say that you're available to come by for an interview. Luc, do you have any?
Share that you.
Yeah, you share that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. What else do we have? Is it mandatory to write the exact date of education or training? I don't remember the precise day or month when I did a course 20 years ago. I think for education and training, since that may not, well, I think education is important to the degree that you qualify for a certain position, and it's typically 3 years of formal education or 5 years or 4 years. But those are degrees, diplomas that very clearly show how long you took a certain degree. And it's not necessarily a language course that you spend 2 weeks or 4 weeks. That probably has no relevance to the formal requirements.
When it comes to trainings, this is good and different, because certain trainings, as laid down in the general rules, they could be counted as professional experience. For these ones, it may be important to have the exact dates in order to calculate the number of weeks, months, or years.
Okay, on the technical topics, do we need to have gone through an official technical process prior to taking the test? Well, you need to have a full medical checkup. No. That actually, I meant it as a joke, but I realized it's not that funny, because you will need a medical checkup, but that is right before you take up employment.
Yep.
So that is the very end of the process.
Yep.
But on a more serious note, you don't need any official technical process, though. Increasingly, TestWe or perhaps no, it's actually the system provider will want you to test your computer to be sure that you can run the specific app on the computer on which you'll be taking the test. And that computer typically needs to be a computer where you have admin access, so you can install that particular app in which the exam is going to run. So they might require you to test your systems. Other than that, no other test in that regard. It's basically being available to sit the test at the booked time and date and going through with it. Can I participate in 87 competition? CM, that is, okay, it escapes me what that might be, but 87 competition, if relevant experience will be collected on the 1st of July and submitting the application on the 2nd of July. So I think the question is that this candidate seems to complete the necessary education or work experience by pretty much, but as long as it's before the cutoff date, it should be all right.
It's
right?
All right.
Exactly. So it's the application cutoff date, and occasionally, I don't think this is the case for the competitions that are ongoing right now, but occasionally they meaning the selection board in the notice of competition might say that you need to have completed your work experience or your studies by such and such date. which may not be the same date as the exam application or competition application date. That helps candidates because they're aware that if the competition is launched, I don't know, in March, and they know that a large number of potential candidates are going to finish, and let's talk about the 85. Maybe they launch it in December and application deadline 28th of February, but they can say, well, as long as you complete your degree by June, you qualify.
Yeah.
But again, you need to complete then your degree. So you may, in that case, it creates a situation where you may pass all the exams, but if you don't get your degree as you are expected to, then you may not meet the formal criteria. Exactly. So that is typically in the notes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, one more question, and then we are done for the day, which is not to say that we are going to abandon your questions. We're going to follow up and find a way to communicate those back to you, write them up in some form, at least the open ones, not the ones we have answered. I'm just picking and choosing something that we can answer relatively quickly. Will the exams, for instance, 86, be postponed to next year, or will they be this year? Well, that's a good closing question here. Again, taking the crystal ball and trying to predict what is pretty hard to predict. It seems that these exams, the ones that are ongoing, they will likely happen in practical terms sometime in September, October, but with a big caveat, because there are, as we said before, a lot of moving parts, maybe even legal challenges to the degree that maybe there's a procurement going on where the new provider has to be the long-term provider of the technical running of the tests. And that might take more time than it's practically feasible until September or October. So there are many seemingly minor but consequential open questions that needs to fall in place. I think the intention is there, and certainly the pressure from the various clients, is that what they call clients of EPSO?
Yes, in the stakeholders, institutions. Yes,
right,
clients,
stakeholders and
yes.
Clients, internal clients of EPSO, and you are not the only clients of EPSO, you're the ultimate client, but certainly internally, it's the various institutions and DGs and exceptionally some agencies who use and basically have EPSO as their selection body. So also they are putting a lot of pressure on selection boards, on EPSO as such, because it's in everyone's interest that these things are moving ahead. There are vacancies, there are a lot of, there's turnover, there are political pressure, there are new competencies, not necessarily in a legal sense, but just new areas that the EU becomes very active in, and that requires staff. And that requires staff who is not hired on an ad hoc basis, but in a systematic and transparent way. So with that, Luc, any words to add?
Well, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
We are happy that we could deal with quite a big panoply of questions, and I hope that they will be useful to write your application.
Absolutely.
In the near future, and to be successful in the competition.
Absolutely. And just to say, so you see on the screen, there is a discount code, which is valid for 2 more days. It's a 20% off on all digital products and the EU course, which is a comprehensive 12-hour e-learning course on how the EU works, decision-making, history, and the institutions. Make use of that. And also just to basically provide some update as to this particular kind of event, this Ask Me Anything, which I think Luc and I really enjoy, but that's not the goal that we enjoy. The point is that you get something out of it. And so far we get the impression that it is well received. So we are probably going to do it fairly systematically, especially after the summer break. And we'll figure out what's the best format and what's the best way. But it seems to be a good approach so far. But again, if you have some comments, not just on specifically the content, but the form, more than welcome. So send it our way. Let us know if you think a different format or different way could work better. And we're probably also going to experiment with a way to crowdsource questions and see
Yeah.
which questions may garner a lot of interest. So you can upvote and downvote questions. But anyways, those are on our radar. A big thanks to Jofi, to Balázs, and another Jofi for helping put this together. And I'm happy the sound worked out good. So at this point, all seems to be fine. So thanks very much for being with us, and take the preparation seriously. Set your mind to it. Even take some time on the beach. That's absolutely fine, or in the mountains, or wherever it pleases you. But think about the exams and the career, because there are a lot of other candidates. So we encourage you to take it seriously and set your mind to it if you want to succeed. So with those wise, motivating words, thanks very much for being here, and to be continued.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Luc, and thanks everyone.
Bye.